Hello, my name is Ezra Quarterman, and I'm a producer with Atlanta Video Network. 8 weeks away from our state election for governor, and we possibly can have our first African-American governor, also our first female governor. We've got a chance to sit down with an interview, a very substantial interview, that talks about Stacey Abrams' upbringing, her education, and her political views. You should watch this interview to inform yourself in order to make a wise decision, an informed decision, in 8 weeks on Election Day. We hope you enjoy the interview.
The superwomen of Georgia. The women of Atlanta and all of Georgia are creating positive change in business, politics, and the civic influence of our communities. Join us each Monday evening here at Newsmakers Live as we salute the magic of these women and their contributions to our daily lives. And now, from BQE Restaurant and Lounge in the heart of Atlanta's historic Auburn Avenue district, here is your Newsmakers host, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Maynard Eaton.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Newsmakers Live. Tonight is kind of a special night. We have the first African-American woman to run for governor of the state of Georgia. That in itself is remarkable. But however, this lady has an incredible background. But I'll leave that to Maynard Eaton. Ladies and gentlemen, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Mr. Maynard Eaton.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you. We kind of pinned or labeled our 10th season the year of Superwomen. And God knows you epitomize that.
Thank you.
You've become a national figure in a statewide race. Is that helping? Fund-wise, is it helping your profile here in Georgia?
I like to think of our campaign as locally grounded but nationally known, because we're trying to do something different in Georgia. We are trying to break a 15-year drought of not electing statewide Democrats. And one of the ways to do so is to amplify the message of how we can get this work done. While I'm excited to stand in a position to possibly make history, the history I'm most concerned about is making certain that Democrats become the governor and the lieutenant governor and the public service commissioners of Georgia again. But the way to fund that has required both local investment but also national investment, because Georgia is a national state. We are a state that is a leader in transportation. We are a leader in the economy. We're a leader in financial technology. Our election matters to the rest of the country. We've done our best to draw in the film community. That makes us a national target, and I'm very excited to know that my campaign is drawing that attention, but I want it not only for my campaign, I want it for my administration.
Representative Abrams, Leader Abrams, I was talking to a bright young guy, businessman today. He says, man, she's the brightest candidate we've probably ever seen. Articulate, sharp, but will Georgia elect a black woman as governor? Is that something you have to overcome? Is it that's the naysayers?
I want Georgia to elect the most qualified candidate for governor, and that happens to be me. I am a Yale-educated tax attorney. I have a master's degree in public policy with a focus on tax policy from the LBJ School of Public Affairs. I have a bachelor's degree from Spelman College. I'm a small business owner. I have been a published author. I am a small business owner who has done both civic work as well as corporate work. And I was the first woman and first person of color, first woman to ever lead in the history of the Georgia General Assembly and the first person of color to lead in the House of Representatives. I bring an unmatched set of skills in the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. And that is why I'm going to win, because I'm not going to take a single community for granted. I'm going to invest across the state. I am not running to be the governor of Atlanta. I'm running to be the governor of all of Georgia. And by doing the work of actually reaching out to those who are marginalized, those who go unseen and unheard, but also those who simply want to know that there's a candidate thinking about their needs, that's why I'm going to win, and that's why I'm going to become the next governor.
But given that brilliance, given that stellar background, your critics will say, well, you kind of scuttled the Hope Scholarship. Your critics, they also say, why is she in debt? Given that, I mean, you're brilliant, but some say you didn't pay your bills. Your critics.
Well, and my critics have the right to say what they want. My critics do not have the right to their own facts. And that's the problem that I'm seeing emerging in this campaign. I understand the desperation that my opponent may feel seeing the polls. But that is no excuse for terrifying families and telling them that the Hope Scholarship no longer exists. Because here's the fact. The fact is that 100% of African American students still have access to the Hope Scholarship because of my work. The fact is Republicans were going to gut that scholarship, and in the process they were going to implement a universal SAT, ACT score. Students of color, poor students, were not going to meet that metric. And where my opponent was willing to say, fine, I'm just going to say no for the symbolism, I went to work. And I got the Republicans to agree to keep the Hope Scholarship with a B average for every student who qualified. That means 100% of African American students still qualify for the Hope Scholarship. But because they were going to have to pay a little bit more, I got the governor to invest in a 1% low interest loan program so no one goes into deep debt to pay that difference. I saved a full day, full week of pre-K, and I made certain that we had access to technical college. And the part
that was a trade-off, pre-K, was it not?
Well, that's exactly one of the things we got. We were able to get pre-K, we were able to save the Hope Scholarship with a B average, and we were able to get remedial courses for technical college. The one piece I couldn't get in those negotiations was the B average, the 3.0 being lowered back to a 2.0. And so I asked a young legislator, who was the only Hope Scholar in the General Assembly, to carry legislation that I asked for to restore that. And that was Stacey Abrams. And the bill she carried had my name on it. She has never passed a bill that I didn't have my name on. And so taking credit, to me, is a very sad display, because she can have, I give her all credit for the work she did, but she is mischaracterizing how she got there. And it makes me question what she'll do when there's another tough challenge in front of her. When it comes to my debt, here's what I tell people. I have never shirked my responsibilities. I've filed my taxes on time every year. But I can't defer cancer treatment payments for my father. I can't defer medical insurance for my mother. I can't defer putting a roof over the head of my niece. I can't defer helping my grandmother when she broke her back. I am responsible for 2 households, making the same money I had when I was a single person. And so the reality is my money has to stretch further. And we have a lot of folks who have a good salary but don't have wealth.
Right.
And that's an issue we should be talking about, because income and wealth are different. I have good income.
And that's what your supporters say. You really live in a life most of us live.
I have good income. I do not have wealth. And I want to get to wealth, but I want everyone to have that opportunity. I'm running so that every Georgian has the freedom and opportunity to thrive. And that means having an economic mobility plan, the only one that has been offered by a single candidate, that talks about how we put money back into the pockets of our family, how do we increase financial literacy and financial wellness, and how do we make certain most families don't have to deal with the crippling issue of debt just to take care of themselves and their families.
You are articulate. Let's talk about this Stacey versus Stacey. Has it gotten ugly? Does commercials seem mean-spirited? And you swinging back, too.
Well, I have only responded, and I do not respond with anything other than facts. My opponent was the first person to pull from the Republican playbook and put out an ad that is intentionally misleading, that is inherently dishonest, and that's designed to suppress voters. That's what the Republicans do. That should not be what Democrats do. I'm deeply concerned that in an effort to win an election, she is willing to hurt the very people she purports to want to help. The only advertisements you've seen from my campaign have responded directly to her attacks, because they are misleading and they are untruthful. But you will not see me put out attack ads, because that's not how you win elections. That's not how you convince the marginalized to think that their voice matters. We have to take the high road, because that's the only way to victory, not going on the low road.
Can you make the marginalized, the least of these, feel like their vote matters? Barack Obama could. I mean, and I know you are articulate and galvanizing and compelling and all that, but will they come out and vote? Can you increase the voting total?
Well, I will do 2 things. One, President Obama actually did increase the voter turnout in 2008. President Obama lost by 204,000 votes without spending a single dollar in the general election in Georgia.
Sure did, you're right.
And the fact is, he increased, for example, African-American turnout rates to 30% of their overall turnout. That was a high watermark. We've never dipped below 29%. That happened because we had a candidate who spoke to their issues. But I'm going to go a step further. I'm actually talking in the primary in a way that I'm going to also talk about in the general. I'm going to talk about criminal justice reform. I'm going to talk about an earned income tax credit. I'm going to talk about making certain you don't go into debt to put your 2-year-old in daycare. And I'm going to offer comprehensive, bold, and detailed plans. Because yes, folks don't vote because they don't think there's a reason to vote for you.
Yeah.
And you aren't going to vote for someone unless they understand the life you've lived. My family struggled to stay above the poverty line, and sometimes we sank. And because of that, I know what we need to do. But more than just knowing, I have the experience to get it done, because that's what I've done for the last 11 years in the legislature and for the last 20 years as a professional.
Haven't you had to walk politically kind of a fine line here between what was politically prudent and what you thought was right, but also perhaps what the Black Caucus may have supported? You've coming up against them from time to time, have you not? Look at that smile.
Oh, I'm smiling because it's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
What people forget is I was the first African American leader in the House of Representatives. I was the first woman to lead in the House of Representatives. I was the first Atlantan to lead in the House of Representatives. I was the first DeKalb County person to lead in the House of Representatives. And every one of those communities had an elected leader. There was a head of the Black Caucus. There was a head of the Women's Caucus. There was a head of the Atlanta delegation. There was a head of the DeKalb delegation. That was not me. And the usurpation of someone else's position to give myself more credit would have been wrong. What I did instead was bolster the activities of every group. I paid my dues. I showed up when I needed to, but I also gave space and leadership opportunities to those who were elected to lead those caucuses. And
There's some bruises too, don't it?
I do, and because you can't always explain that every time you do something. Sometimes people have to just lean on their own understanding. But what I've tried to do is, if you look at my record, there is not a single thing that I have done to undermine the legitimacy of our caucuses. I have worked for women, I've worked for people of color, I've worked for the African American community, and I am the only candidate, Democrat or Republican, who has consistently delivered results for every one of those communities. No one else running, Democrat or Republican, can point to the results that I can point to.
Will they deliver for you think, now in the primary? Are you depending vote totals on those folks to come out for you, given your track record?
I believe that the African American vote, which is the largest percentage of the vote in the Democratic caucus, in the Democratic coalition statewide, absolutely, I believe I will secure the majority of African American votes. I think I will secure the majority of every single community votes. And for those legislators who have disagreed with me, that is entirely their prerogative. I don't disparage that. But what I do say is that if you look at my record, you and I both come from the church. Let the work I've done speak for me. I've protected voting rights in Georgia. I'm the only person who has registered 200,000 people to vote in the state of Georgia. I protected reproductive rights. I fought for labor unions. I fought for every community in our state, and I did so by lifting up others to do that work. And while I may not always get the credit, that's not the point. The point is we are in a better position today than we would have been otherwise.
What's the path, do you think, to victory now? With or without Republican votes? How do you get this over this hump? And then what do you do come you're facing the Republicans at some point?
So the reality,
it doesn't get any easier, does it?
Of course not. But I've never been in the legislature when it was easy. I became minority leader when Democrats lost every statewide elected office, and where we were nearly at a super minority in the House, and they had a super majority in the Senate. But here's the thing. There are two pathways. The pathway my opponent is taking, the pathway taken by every statewide Democrat since 2002, has been to try to convince Republicans they really meant to be Democrats. It has failed every time. It is like trying to convince an atheist that they meant to be a Catholic. My approach is that we have enough Democrats on the ground who are untapped, that if we simply talk to them and do the work of cultivating them and investing in them like we invest in Republicans, that they will vote. That's like just getting Baptists to go to church. My focus is that. My focus is reaching out to our own people. And that is not just a racial issue. It's a racial, regional, geographical, ethnicity. We have to talk to Democrats, because here's the last number I'll give you. There are 1.5 million likely Democratic voters in the state of Georgia who do not vote in midterms. We lose elections by 200,000 votes. We have enough voters to win. We just have to trust them enough to invest in them and to treat them like the valuable voters they are. And I'm the only candidate doing that work.
And those votes you think will come out. That's your game plan.
Well, I've seen it work. Because for me, this isn't a theory. As the Democratic leader, Republicans drew themselves 124 seats, meaning there are technically only 56 Democratic seats in the state legislature. However, we hold 64 of them. I flipped 6 Republican seats and made them Democratic by going into communities where people were marginalized and undercounted. I talked to them, I hired staff to go in and cultivate them, and we flipped seats in Metro Atlanta. We got a Democrat installed in Paulding County. We flipped seats down in South Georgia and Sumter and Schley County. We have a Democrat in Meriwether and Troup County. We know it works. It's more expensive, and it's seen as riskier because the population we're talking to typically doesn't lift up their voices because they're often ignored. I believe if you want to transform a community, you have to go to those who are the least likely to be engaged, because if you get them, you've got everyone.
Racial divisiveness. There's some who suggest, and I've heard this just today, that this Stacey versus Stacey confrontation isn't heightening or enhancing this racial divisiveness in the state. Does that help you or hurt you?
There's nothing helpful about racial division.
But it's here.
But it is here. It's real. And it's not simply African American versus white.
That's
it also,
true.
We have to consider that we have a growing Latino population, a growing Asian American population. Race is an issue in the South. It's an issue in Georgia. The question is it used as a strength or as a weapon? And unfortunately, there are those who want to weaponize race in this election. Yes, I will be the first African American woman to serve as a governor in the history of America should I be elected.
Yeah.
But that should be a positive.
That's heady stuff.
It is. But it should be a positive. It is an aspirational moment because that means I'm clearing space for other women to run, for other communities of color to run. That also means that I can create opportunities across racial lines. I'm not running a base campaign. There is no Democratic base. That's how often communities of color are overlooked, because we are assumed to be the base. We're going to do what we're supposed to no matter what. We don't have a base in Georgia. What we have is a coalition opportunity. And I am the candidate who is focusing on bringing that coalition to fruition. I'm the only candidate who has 10 offices around the state. I'm the only candidate who has worked with the Latino population and gotten the Legislator of the Year award from them. I've worked with the Asian Pacific Islanders and gotten their Legislative Leadership Award. I've worked with the African American community. I've worked with the majority white community. I am building a coalition that looks like Georgia, using race as a marker for what we can be, because our diversity, if we use it properly, is a strength for Georgia.
It's almost intimidating sitting next to you, as good as you are verbally. Whew, got me sweating up for this thing.
These are very good questions.
Seriously, though, to what degree is President Trump's ghost or specter hovering over this race in Georgia? And are you contemplating, once you get past this primary, as many expect you will, that comes next?
I think the occupant of the White House is serving the function of energizing Democrats, because we know now that there is a consequence for inaction in elections. Those who did not vote in 2016 thinking their votes don't matter, understand it does matter. It hurts you. And that harm continues to resonate. And this goes back to your earlier question about working with Republicans when I become governor.
Yes.
Part of my job as leader was to work with Republicans.
Yeah.
The difference is I'm not trying to convince Republicans I'm one of them. I never have. There are those who say I've suddenly become a progressive or become a liberal. I've been the same person the whole time. My mission has never been to convince someone to believe what I believe. My responsibility is to convince you to do what I need you to do based on your own beliefs. That's how I got the Tea Party to work with me on environmental legislation. I never convinced them that climate change is real. I convinced them that property values are real. And that by working with us on environmental issues, their property values will be stabilized because they wouldn't lose their value. I got the anti-abortion activists to work with me on a First Amendment bill that Republicans were pushing, that the Chamber of Commerce was pushing. But I explained to them not that they should agree with the rights of Occupy Atlanta and with labor unions. They needed to understand that if they didn't work with me, they would lose the right to protest as well. Now, that's not a perfect example, but my point is this. You meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. But part of my responsibility is to engage whoever is in charge to deliver for our people, to deliver for our communities, to deliver progressive successes. And that means being able to talk to anyone.
Leader, is that new school politics? And are you a new school political leader?
Having studied someone who shares your name, Maynard Jackson will tell you it's not new school politics to negotiate. It's not new school politics to understand that because you have a title doesn't mean you have all the power. And part of the responsibility of the next governor is to know that there will still be a Republican legislature, at least for a few years until we get to redistricting. But in that process, my responsibility is to make life better for all Georgians, regardless of their political stripe. It's to make life better for everyone because that's the job of a leader. And that means sometimes having negotiations with people with whom you vehemently disagree because they have the ability to harm the people you were sent to support. And for me, you can't walk away. That's one of the sharp differences between me and my opponent. She would have walked away from saving 4-year-olds and preserving pre-K. She would have walked away because she couldn't get everything she wanted. I know you can't walk away from leadership because you don't get what you want. Leadership is staying and making the tough choices and standing by those hard decisions because everyone deserves to have a voice, and you have to protect as much as you can for as many as you can.
You sound so good, and I've covered politics for the last 40 years. But there's somebody out there saying, gosh, she's good. But is she good enough? Will Georgia elect a black woman as governor?
If they vote.
And that's what you say to the doubters?
The question is
how do you sell that?
The question is, what do you doubt? If the doubt is whether you will vote for me, then the issue is, what do you need to hear? What is your issue? I talk about education, educating bold and ambitious children from cradle to career. I talk about building a thriving and diverse economy in all 159 counties. I talk about the fact that we need a proven leader leading an engaged and responsive government. I'm the only candidate who has detailed plans for every one of those pillars. I'm the only candidate who actually has experience as a business owner, who signed both the front of a paycheck as well as the back of one. The only one who's been a political leader and a civic leader. The question isn't, can I win? The question is, will you vote? And my mission is to make certain that the answer is yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we talked about Superwomen 2018. This is the quintessential example of just that.